Marisa, let's start with you, because I know there's a key piece of research which you will all be able to download on QR codes. We'll show those a little later on, that your bank has just released on adaptation financing. Now, we know, of course, that mitigation and adaptation go hand in hand. Up until now, not so much focus maybe on adaptation. With all these major climate emergencies that we're seeing, Pakistan, I mentioned just a minute ago, what are the headlines from your research? What is the reading on how urgent the need is?
Sure. So, of course, the world is galvanized around carbon reduction, which is mitigation. And sometimes we just have to define what we mean when we use these terms. But the notion of adaptation finance is dealing with the reality that no matter what we do, all the wonderful efforts that all of us are trying to focus on, the climate change reality is here. It's not going away. Even under a 1.5-degree scenario. So therefore, we need capital to flow to help our systems adapt to these realities. And we wanted to try to put this in some quantifiable way for the finance community to get their arms around this concept, because oftentimes, unless you can say how big the problem is, put numbers to it, it's very hard to mobilize finance. So we did a research study, and the academics that assisted us with this came out with some pretty sobering statistics, but they're very much a call to action. So what it effectively says is, in order to, and we studied 10 of the largest developing economies, so China, India, Pakistan, Indonesia, 10 of these very important markets in the emerging world who are disproportionately affected by climate change. We did the math, and what it tells us is we need about $30 billion to be invested in the next decade in order to avoid $377 billion of loss and damage. So this is real economic loss. If we wait, and if we don't act within this decade, that number doubles if you start in 2040. So it goes from 30 to 60, but the damages would be about a 1.4 trillion, and that's under a 1.5-degree scenario. So if we are going to blow through that, then it's exponential. And this is the type of money that needs to go into adaptive agriculture, so dealing with drought and extreme climate activity. It is homes of the future that can withstand all of this activity, the extreme heat and cold and so on. But there's a real commercial proposition here. And if you translate that into return on investment terms, that's a 12 times multiplier. And I would challenge most of us in the room to figure out how you get 12 times on anything these days. So we hope that this is going to be a call to action for the money to flow.
And the need is great, but the opportunity is there as well. I know, Jeremy, from our conversation before, you see it as an opportunity, don't you? I think you said it was an opportunity to transform and drive an economic revolution, you said, in the Global South.
I did.
Can you expand on that?
Look, I think we are on the cusp of an extraordinary change in the world economy, and this shift towards clean energy, sustainable agriculture, better land use, these are the technologies that are going to underpin economic growth over the next 25, 50 years. Much of that economic growth will happen in the Global South in different ways, but across countries that have enormous assets in terms of a young population, in terms of their access and availability of solar energy that can be turned into clean energy, in terms of natural capital. And so I think this is in part the kind of the antidote to some of the gloom and doom. If we can focus on the scale of the opportunity, on the mechanisms to deploy capital into that opportunity, then I think we can look at the next 20 years and not just talk about decarbonization as a way of giving us some climate security and mitigating risk, but we can look at it as a way of unleashing the potential of economies across the world.
Yeah, which is what we'd all want to see, because that's a just transition then, isn't it? Marisa, we know that the capital flows currently aren't moving as fast as you'd like them to be.
Yes.
John Kerry sat in that very seat a couple of hours ago talking about the very same thing, saying that things are shifting. So in the meetings that you have, I know you've been to both of the COP meetings the last 2 years, can you tell us, is there concrete evidence that there is a change, a sense of change?
Yes, absolutely. And that's, again, I think sometimes the headlines are pretty negative. But this is a thorny issue. So a lot of public statements were made at COP26, a lot of pledges, a lot of enthusiasm. And then there was this expectation in COP27 that it would all be done. This is not a one-year thing. This is extremely hard graft, and it requires multiple actors to get around the table. When you're talking about very thorny systemic issues, you need to graft in lots and lots of people with expertise and roll up your sleeves and just get stuck in. But what we're seeing is an absolute willingness to do that. It isn't this, I work in my silo, you work in your silo, and these things don't cross. It is this recognition that this is all bigger than any of us, and if we're collaborating together on the same topic with that same mission and North Star, then that's where we're going to have a fighting chance of getting it done.
Okay, so 2023 might be the year of blended finance,
Yes.
in your opinion, Jeremy. Just tell us what that is and why. Why is this the year for it? And why is it so crucial?
So what is it?
Yep.
It's bringing together different forms of capital: public, private, philanthropic.
Yes, the three Ps.
The three Ps, right? And using that to unlock, if you will, the investments needed in the new economic system, right? And why do we need that? Because putting money into that new system involves new risks that are not well understood by the private sector. Sometimes it involves a mix of what economists call public goods and private goods. So not all of that will be financed by the private sector. So you need new forms of combining, if you will, different forms of capital to get behind a new economic system. Why now? Because three things are coming together, really simply.
Yep.
One thing that's happening is that the technologies are coming through. And you've heard this on earlier panels, but many of the technologies that we thought were hard to invest in, and the most obvious example being clean energy, are now in the money and getting there quickly. And so the technology change is making a lot more of this investable. The second thing that's happening is that we are getting policy coming through, and the most obvious example of that is the Inflation Reduction Act in the States, which is, if you're incentives on steroids, right, for the clean economy and for this new model of growth. And the third thing that's happening is that the financial institutions, right, across the public sector, including the big multilateral financial institutions such as the World Bank, and the private sector players are learning how to engage with each other. And it's those three things coming together, right, that give us the unlock.
Okay, so Marisa, what concrete or tangible examples can you give us of that happening? I know these.
Sure, very happy to. But I'll take just a moment, because we talk about this now in this moment of 2023 as being the year of blended finance. This has been a lot of work over a long period of time. And Jerry and I were together, we said in 2017, at the World Economic Forum, the blended task force was created. And I remember sitting in the room, and we as a private sector actor had certain assumptions about what the public sector was going to do, and they had certain assumptions about what we were going to do, and we were talking like this. And we needed to find a way of communicating with each other to understand what each brought to the table in a collaborative way and work our way through some of this in order to, as Jeremy says, unlock the capital. So now we're here at a moment where we can show tangible examples, because always this expectation, everyone says, millions to billions or millions to trillions. We're like, how about starting with like 10 million first and making sure that works before we go to big? But we are now at a big moment. So let me give you a really exciting example. So the idea of a just energy transition partnership was launched at COP26. And this was Western governments, this is now west to east, saying that we have a lot of lessons learned and we have a lot of capital to deploy. We can commit to a number of emerging market developing countries, lend that if they will agree to engage with us in a systemic and holistic look at decarbonizing their economy. So the countries that were picked were Indonesia, so fast-growing economies that were largely dependent on high carbon emitting industry, particularly coal, as their primary source of energy. How do we work with them, and not being preachy of the West and saying, you must do this, but genuinely trying to understand how to look holistically at the economy. So the commitment has been Western multilateral banks commit a significant sum of money, then the private sector comes in behind and matches. So in the case of Indonesia, we got a 10 billion commitment from the US government and others. The private sector committed a further 10 billion, and we're right now working with the Ministry of Indonesia, who's incredibly progressive, very serious about this, saying, I want to work with you on this. And we're sitting there in this hard graph now of early coal decommissioning. This is what the world wants. But we also have to recognize in this just transition, if they are going to decommission coal early, hundreds of thousands of people work in coal. So they're saying to us, if we're going to do this, how are we going to create livelihoods for all those people? And how quickly can we move to the cleaner technology? So this is a transition. It's not an overnight thing, but we're here and it's big and it's real and it's country level.
And it's incredibly complex, isn't it?
Very complex.
Just briefly, because I've got a couple of questions I want to fly through. We've got private areas here, we've got public areas here. What about the developmental banks and the institutions in the middle? Jeremy, what do you want from them and what needs to happen from those players?
They play a critical role,
Yeah.
let's be clear. And they always have been, if you will, financiers of economic development and system change. But we now need them to take what they've done historically and go somewhere between 10x and 20x. And the key for them to do that is to see that the balance sheet that they can deploy is used to crowd in private capital at scale. And historically, their challenge in a way has been that they provided finance. A lot of it has been, and almost all of it has been debt finance, and that then hasn't brought in the private sector finance alongside. So what we need them to do is to see themselves as catalytic, using their balance sheet, right, to crowd in not just other debt finance, but also equity finance that can enable large-scale, if you will, transformation of the economy in ways that are affordable for those developing countries.
And by the way, this is the new thing, because in the good old days, what happened is multilateral development banks often said, my job is to go where the public capital markets aren't. So I play here, and then when it's ready for prime time, then I step out and those guys step in. Now it is, we're in the same project or structure together, and it's this multiplier effect.
I've got so many more questions to ask you, but sadly I'm not going to get to them. I have to speak to you in the green room afterwards. But just to wrap up, what is your call to action? Jeremy, let's start with you.
Call to action is recognize the incredible economic opportunity and bring the different forms of capital together to invest particularly in the global south.
And mine is 0.4% of capital flows are going to adaptation right now, and we know what waiting means. So time is now. We need to balance that kind of capital with the capital that's going to mitigation.
Okay. Thank you so much. It's been a really, really interesting conversation. So thank you.
Thank you.
Marisa and Jeremy, a big round of applause, please. Thank you so much. Wonderful.